Good evening. This is Hope Preston, and welcome to the February 2025 Master Gardener meeting for the Washington County Master Gardeners. This is going to be a different presentation than we usually have because we have Dr. Leslie Madsen, our statewide manager of the Master Gardeners, to talk to us this evening. She has a presentation, plus she would like some input from us at the end. So there will be an opportunity for us to chime in with the things that we are thinking and what's important to us. And when we get to that point, Leslie will explain how to do that. So Leslie, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Hope, and big thanks to Hope and Sue and Mary and everyone else who arranged for me to be here and took care of all the technical details. I really appreciate the warm welcome and all of the support. So my talk tonight is called Learning to Grow Again, Observing, Listening, and Planning. And it really sort of sums up my first year as manager of the Oregon State University Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Program. I arrived in this position on December 29th, 2023, and I moved to Oregon on January 6th of last year. And then we were hit by the ice storm. So I was off to quite a start, and it's been just as exciting, but slightly less terrifying ever since. So um, I want to start with a bit of a metaphor. You'll have to forgive me because I was an English major. So when I moved here, I'd been living in Boise, where gardening to a certain extent is on the easy mode if it were a video game. And my yard was flat and it was sunny, and the person who had lived there before was a gardener. When I dug my trowel into the soil, it was full of life. And the entire lot on which my home sat was 1/5 of an acre, very suburban, ecologically friendly, no wildlife pressure besides a few mice. And I was in charge of irrigation because it was pretty dry. So there's only the water that I put on it for most of the year. And then I moved to Eugene, and it's much more like the lot on the right side of my screen here. I'm lucky enough to be able to live on about 1/5 of an acre. It's entirely shady. There's a dozen oaks on my property, 35 rhododendrons, about 20 azaleas, and other huge trees. So I'm learning to grow in the shade and on a very, very steep slope with deer and turkeys and rats, I recently learned. Um, there aren't yet plants that flower in all seasons for pollinators. And I'm within the wildlife urban interface boundary. So I'm in a low hazard zone for wildfire, but a few lots down is in a moderately hazardous zone. So there's lots for me to learn, lots for me to think about, and I feel like a newbie gardener all over again. And it's very much a metaphor for the way that I have felt about my first year here. It's been very exciting. I love learning new things. I love meeting new people. I've got to meet all my neighbors here. But even if you haven't moved lately, you may have noticed we live in a time of dynamic change. And so the things I'm talking about today are often things that I'm learning and that we all may need to learn something more about. But I wanted to start with some great news. So the statewide numbers for 2024 in the Master Gardener program in Oregon. So we had more than 2,300 volunteers that were active this year. 495 of those were trainees, 29% more than in 2023. And 409 of those were certified by the annual deadline to certify. And many of them are still working on it. They didn't just leave us. We had Master Gardener programs in 29 Oregon counties, including Josephine County for the first half of the year, but unfortunately that extension office had to close. And then in Wasco County, they also crossed the border and went into Sherman County and did some service there. We have a new Master Gardener volunteer program in Malheur County as well. The Master Gardener volunteers in the state donated 213 hours this year, which is equivalent to about 77 full-time employees, which is just phenomenal. Statewide, your labor was valued at $5.46 million That's a 47.5% increase over 2023, both because the value of a volunteer hour increased and because you did a lot more hours. You answered more than 38,000 questions, which was 21% higher than the previous year, and you donated 40 tons of food statewide to your local food banks. That's a lot of food that you grew and schlepped and donated to your neighbors in need. That's 5 tons more than the previous year. And then also in that same period between, not the same period exactly, but between November of 2023 and January of 2025, we have hired 12 new extension faculty and staff to support the Master Gardener Volunteer Program. There were a lot of positions open when I arrived. I'm not responsible for hiring those. I do not supervise them. But boy, is it easier to run a program when there are people in place in the counties. In general, I just want to say you all are doing amazing work, and I appreciate everything you do. I spoke with Srijana Shrestha, excuse me, Shrestha, who is the professor of practice who oversees the Portland Metro Master Gardener program. And today she was talking about how one way she knows that the work you do is so valuable is that especially in Washington County, you're so valued by the community that you get more invitations to partner and to show up places than you could possibly ever fulfill, to partner with different community groups and schools, to participate in events, etc. I know you can't accommodate all of those requests, and I appreciate you using your time where you can have the biggest impacts. We are committed all together, staff, faculty, me, volunteers, in growing the program within our capacity to do so. So what do we do? I just talked about the work we did. And we often think about the Master Gardener Volunteer Program as being a gardening program. And many people indeed, when they think, what's a Master Gardener? That's just someone who knows a lot about gardening and maybe they took a class and got a certificate. But you and I know that it's so much more than that. And so I brought this up at my Joy of Gardening talk, if you happened to be there last July at that conference. But it's important to remember that we are not merely a gardening group. Gardening is our primary way of engaging with the public, but we're not gardening for gardening's sake. Instead, the OSU Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Program builds more connected, healthy, and resilient communities using gardening education as our most visible tool. We're supporting people to garden because we know how much gardening can improve people's lives and well-being. So many of us have experienced that ourselves, including me. And that's one reason why you're going to increasingly hear me refer to the program I run as not merely the Master Gardener program, but as the Master Gardener Volunteer program. Anyone can go get the Home Horticulture Certificate, which is a very similar, curriculum to the Master Gardener Volunteer program so far. And they can go other places online and get similar horticultural knowledge to what a trainee gets. But it takes someone special and really a big group of really dedicated, knowledgeable, caring people like you to help neighbors and build community, which is why I often, and now I'm emphasizing Master Gardener Volunteer. Master Gardener is an adjective. It modifies volunteer. So not to dive into the deep end, but I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that I've been facing this year, because Hope and Sue told me that you all want to know what I've been up to. Why haven't you been hearing from me? What's going on with the head honcho down there in Corvallis? So on this slide, you'll see there's a Venn diagram, and there's a number of items that are challenges that I've been facing and that our program coordinators have been facing. And in some sense, challenges our volunteers have been facing. And on the background, there are different colors. And in case you're colorblind, I'll explain them to you. So at the left here is a yellow color. And anything on this, in this circle, I believe can be addressed through better change management. Anything in this blue circle here at the right, I believe can be addressed through focusing on our growing and belonging programming and education. And anything in this purple circle here down at the bottom can be addressed with better professional development for faculty and staff, as well as an internal culture shift that I'll explain in a moment. And then anything with a little triangle next to it is something that would be helped significantly by revenue, by an influx of funds. So one of the things I learned is that we are out of compliance with a number of Oregon State University policies, such as that all volunteers need to be checked against the sex offender registry, right? So I get to be the bearer of that news, or your program coordinators get to be the bearer of that news. And not everyone's thrilled about that, but there's certain policies that we just have to follow, and we don't really have a choice in that. And so I've been trying to help people understand why we are making some of the changes we are around youth protection policies, for example, or youth protection education and training, growing and belonging training, and any kind of background checks. So that is something that can be addressed by pretty much just change management, good change management, and communication. I don't have any way to email everybody. Um, Sometimes I hear from program coordinators, or from volunteers. This is news we'd rather hear from you, Leslie, than from our program coordinator. It more rightfully comes from you. And I'm like, great, I have no way to email all of you. So I'm hoping that with OSU now having a subscription to Salesforce, we'll be able to create a pretty robust database and be able to track volunteers and segment a list and communicate with all of you. That's not something that's going to happen in the next week. It's a major undertaking, but we are working on it. The other challenges I'm facing is that there's just we live in an age when technology is constantly changing. There are updates happening to some of the technologies we use. VRS, you may notice, has a slightly different interface now. That was a digital accessibility update. That needed to happen to keep us in line with best practices in making sure that everybody that everybody can access the material digitally, basically, regardless of what kind of disability or ability they may have. Um, we have some conflicts among volunteers I have been dealing with, and periodically those float up to me more often than you might think. And the program coordinators, and by whom I'm talking about people at the county level. So in Washington County, that would be Amy, Srijana. Also in the Portland metro area, that would be Kim and Marcia. And honestly, they haven't come to me that much, but in other counties, I deal with a lot of volunteer conflict. And what the program coordinators say to me is, hey, Leslie, I was trained as a scientist, not as a volunteer manager or as somebody who is an expert in interpersonal conflict. And so I'd like to see our program coordinators get more training in such things as crucial conversations, nonviolent communication, growing and belonging training also would go a long way, I think, toward helping them. They don't have a lot of capacity to pause and do a lot of continuing education. And also that usually takes money to, take courses or workshops or to bring in people. There's a number of other things on here that I can address that I will address later in the presentation, so I won't go over everything, but I will say that within the program, I meet with our program coordinators monthly, all together as a group, and I'm in constant communication with them. But as a group, we meet once a month. And when they'll bring ideas to me from volunteers often, or here's something our volunteers are thinking about doing, or here's a question they have about digging and dividing, for example, at plant sales, which a few years ago the Oregon Department of Agriculture put the kibosh on selling plants from people's gardens at plant sales because there's the possibility of transmitting pests or diseases. And so, a volunteer coordinator may come to me and say, hey, they'd like us to revisit that policy because they hear that there's this new chemical that can be used to treat it, right? And I'll say, great, let's create a working group. Who wants to be on that working group? I'm not a horticulturist. I'm not able to lead that, right? And so for that kind of thing, we would create a working group. And then, but also I might bring them if there's something else that volunteers want, I might bring them a sample guidelines and say, okay, here's what you told me your volunteers want. here's what you told me you want. Here's some sample guidelines. Here's a sample course module, whatever. What do you think? And they'll give me some opinions. And then the next month I'll come back and I will show them a new version of it. And often they are confused and they say, Leslie, I thought we were doing it this other way. And I say, no, 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 that was a draft. That's why I was asking for your feedback. And that's why I said, I'm going to come back to you for this. And I worry that there just has been a culture, and I don't know if this is at the county office or if this is at Extension or if this was in the program or what, of people, maybe the program wasn't as grassroots, right? Maybe there wasn't as much solicitation of program coordinator and volunteer feedback. And so I think sometimes they get frustrated with me because I I'm trying to involve them, but to them it looks like me changing my mind a lot, right? And so that's the kind of shift, culture shift I'd like to see us make in the program, is to understand that we're all collaborative, that we are working together toward a common goal, that I need feedback, that I'm not a top-down person, and or I'm not a top-down manager. And yeah, we're all working together. There are other pieces on this. One thing that I was not going to address too much in the later in the presentation, but I want to bring up is currently we're seeing a lot of anti-diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. That's often we hear about anti-DEI, but they're also appending that and accessibility is accessibility for everybody, but especially people with disabilities. And that is affecting our work at Extension. We've been told to continue doing the work, but to make ourselves as small a target as possible. So don't draw too much attention to ourselves, but to continue doing the work that we have been charged by the public to do, which is to serve all Oregonians. We are publicly funded, and so we are going to do that work. Yeah, okay. I will move on from this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my wish lists. We have this great Seed to Supper program. And I know I'm imagining some of you who are on this call have been a part of it, and thank you for that. Seed to Supper, for those who are unfamiliar, is a class that helps people who are food insecure or who are gardening on a budget to grow fresh, nutritious produce that they will actually eat as close to their homes as possible. Most of the people in that program do not necessarily have land to grow on. So sometimes it's a container gardening course. Sometimes we hook them up with a community garden plot. Sometimes we find other places for them to garden, raised beds behind, an extension office, for example. But we're not offering as many classes in Oregon, even though we originated this class. The Oregon Food Bank and Oregon State University were working together on this for a long time. A few years ago, the Oregon Food Bank transferred all the intellectual property over to us, so we run the program exclusively now. Let me be clear, I run the program exclusively at the state level. And when I was surveying those facilitators that I knew taught Seed to Supper in the last year, and I know there's some of you out there who I have not yet been in touch with, that I'm still learning, been teaching Seed to Supper. In the survey I sent out, I heard back, I think, from about 18 people. And the facilitators, for the most part, reported that fewer than 25% of the participants in their Seed to Supper classes were high poverty or food insecure. And so we're not hitting the right demographic for this class, for these courses. And so I would like to see us focus better on what we call our priority communities for these classes. And we need to look really hard into who's experiencing food insecurity in Oregon, and then work very, very hard to figure out how to reach them. I just want to share some of the latest stats from the Oregon Food Bank, and this was updated only 10 days ago. So this is fresh from the oven. So in 2024, the Oregon Food Bank tallied 2.5 million visits to the Oregon Food Bank network food assistance sites. That's a 31% increase over 2023. So Seed to Supper classes can help address some of this. This is why I'm telling you this. I want to inspire you to action. Today, 1 in 8 people and 1 in 6 kids in Oregon face food insecurity, which means they often don't know where their next meal is coming from. And that the Oregon Food Bank has identified 4 what they call priority equity groups who are most likely to experience food insecurity. And that's maybe not surprisingly to you, single mothers and caregivers, refugees and immigrants, and then also people who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, often referred to as BIPOC folks, and then also transgender and gender expansive or gender nonconforming folks. We know from the research of all kinds that these folks are more likely to experience problems of all kinds through discrimination. And I would add to that list veterans and people facing addiction also experience a lot of food insecurity. And so Oregon Food Bank says we're in an ongoing hunger crisis and it's not slowing down. So I want to encourage you to offer Seed to Supper courses. Anyone can teach them. You don't need to be a Master Gardener volunteer to do so. We have a curriculum um, for it. We're in the process of revising it. I had hoped to get that launched this year, but one of my big challenges is just statewide capacity. I will set forth to, as so many of us do in our lives and in our jobs, set forth with grand ambitions to get something done in a certain time period and then realize, oh, I have to answer my email. I need to do some other things too, instead of just this. So I need another year. I have scraped together some money. I've hired an undergraduate research assistant to update that course. And I've hired Sarah West, who's the program coordinator in Union County, to help with that as well. If you or I were to design a course for people gardening on a budget, we probably would not design it to be 6 indoor sessions that are 2-hour long PowerPoint presentations. We would design it to be much more interactive. And we probably in the first session wouldn't have people design a garden from zero to complete garden design in 2 hours, right? So we are revising that curriculum to make it friendlier. But right now it's still a very highly rated program. It's actually adopted more in other states, even though we created it, than it's used here. So Cornell University Extension uses it, Penn State, New Mexico State. We have interest in North Carolina, in Illinois, in Arizona, in California. It's really taking off. And since it was born here, I'd love to see it also take off here. And we have the curriculum available in both English and in Spanish. Which brings us to my next point, which is that at OSU Extension, this is the next item on my wish list, demographic parity. Now, what does that mean? In Oregon, as part of Oregon State University Extension, we are obligated to serve all of the people in Oregon, regardless of how remotely they may live from our cities, what languages they speak, how much money they have, whether they live in a house with a garden or not, or whether or not they own a car that will take them to our events or our workshop sites. As a publicly funded service, we have to hold ourselves accountable to understand their needs and to serve them. Plus, every few years, the USDA's National Institute for Food and Agriculture will do civil rights audits of any university that receives its funds. So OSU Extension gets audited every few years. And even though the Master Gardener program is not a direct recipient of any of those funds, as far as I know, we have to submit our records to show that, for example, if Washington County is 50% male, that 50% of our volunteer corps is male. Yeah, I know you're having a good laugh right now, even though I can't hear you. And that 50% of our participants in our programming are male, or that we're working toward that we're showing evidence that we're working toward that. And the same is true if we're talking about people who speak Spanish as their first language. If that's a certain percentage of the county, our program needs to be serving our participants and our volunteers should be a very similar percentage. It's true of race and ethnicity. It's true of socioeconomic class. It's true of pretty much any protected demographic you can think of, including veteran status. So we're not anywhere near close to demographic parity. Now, I'm not just bringing this up because USDA NEFA tells us we need to. It's the right thing to do. It's what we're charged with doing. Now, this next slide may surprise some of you. I want to just let you know that I'm not here to shake my finger at anybody, and I'm not calling you to the principal's office. This is a US Census map that I pulled up today. I believe it's from 2023, and it's Washington County, and it's broken down by census tract. And I put on the filter that shows that there are like where the high poverty areas are. And the darker the area, the higher poverty it is. And so if I challenged you to make a map, if I just asked you to go to this website and print out a blank census tract map of Washington County, and I asked you to put a dot for every event that you have in Washington County, and then I asked you to print out this map and you overlapped them and held them up to a window so that you could see through both of them, or if you held them side by side, would the dots for your events only be on the light colored areas? And would they only be in a suburban Beaverton, for example? And if the answer is yes, then I can almost guarantee that we are not in demographic parity for socioeconomic status in the county, and probably not for Spanish language access either. So I'd like to, Sue has this link. I don't have the chat open. Oh, there, Sue has shared it. Thank you so much. So this is a screenshot that I have on my screen, but you can go explore that. It's a little bit complex technologically, but basically you can apply all filters for all different kinds of areas, and not just poverty, but all kinds of information. So go at it. Um, so and be curious, right? And think about, well, if we're not yet serving these people, why haven't we been serving these people? And what do we need to do to serve these people? So, for example, when we're talking about Seed to Supper, we encourage Master Gardener volunteers not to advertise Seed to Supper on their usual social media channels, because the people in those darker areas often are not the ones following us on Facebook. Younger people may not be following us on Facebook because Facebook tends to trend older. My kid thinks about it as like the grandkids, or sorry, the grandparents' social media outlet. So yeah, we just need to be careful about how we're recruiting people and think about that. One of the ways we do that is by having great community partners, right? So we find people, or rather organizations, that already have trust-based relationships with the people who, for example, if we're teaching a class on vegetable gardening, who are food insecure. Or who are Spanish speaking, right? So I want to just throw out some numbers here because I had a little bit of fun with this afternoon. So do we have a representative proportion of volunteers fluent in Spanish, as we do in the population in Washington County? So the state of Oregon estimates that there are nearly 24,000 residents in Washington County who speak Spanish at home. So what that would mean in terms of the entire Portland metro area Master Gardener Volunteer Program, all three counties, is that at least 4% of your volunteers are fluent in Spanish, because that's 4% of Washington County. Okay. So based on the number of volunteers in the Portland metro area in 2024 to reach parity, that means we'd have 16 volunteers regularly offering educational opportunities in Spanish in the three-county region, and that most of that programming would be in Washington County, because Washington County has a higher percentage of Spanish speakers than either Multnomah County or Clackamas County. So if you're not reaching those numbers of that population, then I'd like to know how I, as the statewide manager, and your local extension staff and I can support you to do so. And it's partly knowing Spanish, right? But it's also being culturally fluent and being able to relate to people. And that's not something that happens overnight. I encourage you to start to learn some Spanish, because it can go a long way. He estudio escuchando podcasts y libros en español todos los días durante muchos meses, y contraté un tutor y tomo clases en español. So basically, and I apologize for my pronunciation, I'm still learning. I said I have been listening to podcasts and books in Spanish for the last several months, and I've hired a tutor and I'm taking classes in Spanish. I have a 1,500-day streak on the app Duolingo. It's fun. It's good for our brains as we age to learn other languages. So I encourage you, if you have any curiosity about Spanish, to do that. I'm happy to talk with any of you about the great tutor I have as well. Okay, moving on. So we have this Garden Future Initiative, which some of you may have heard of. We're slowly rolling it out. We sort of had a soft launch last year at Joy of Gardening. which is, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Oregon Master Gardener Association's annual conference that takes place every summer. What you're looking at on this slide is the wildfire hazard map produced by OSU in this last year for the state of Oregon. The only areas that are low risk for wildfires are those in the green areas. I don't know if you can see it, but I realized when I took this screenshot, this tiny little blue dot here at the Wildland Urban Interface is where I live in Eugene. But most of the state, as you can see, is not necessarily in terms of population, but in terms of geography, is at moderate or high risk of wildfire. And we get questions now. I'm sure you've heard some of them. What do I do to cut back on the, what kind of landscaping should I be planting so that I'm not opening my home up to being part of a conflagration or a wildfire? What plants should I be planting? We don't have a magic plant list. I wish we did. What is what's water what's water wise, what's drought tolerant, what's heat tolerant, what's also native for like the whole state, right? What should I plant now that will take care of everything? The question, of course, is native to where, because our climate zones are shifting. If you've looked at the USDA climate zones or the sunset garden zones map, you probably have noticed a bit of a shift. So I'd love for you, as you hear about Garden Future, if you're a Master Gardener volunteer, to get engaged with it. We're going to be talking with people. We're not interested in engaging with climate deniers. There are fewer and fewer climate deniers these days, fortunately, climate change deniers. But in getting you to talk with people about what are they seeing in their garden, what are they doing differently in their garden, and what questions do they have for us? Because we want to be able to support people at this really challenging time. All right, so a lot of you are like, well, haven't I heard from Leslie or Dr. Madsen or whatever you want to call me? The job is too big for one person. I have no idea how Gail Langolato, who was my amazing predecessor, did it as only a small piece of her job as a professor at Oregon State in the horticulture department. Currently, we have two positions in the statewide office, mine, which is 100%, and Leanne Locker, and she is our statewide outreach coordinator. She handles a lot of the communication that happens and manages a lot of our outreach programming, our social media and whatnot. And she's at 85% with the program. We really need an instructional designer or educational developer to help us revise the Master Gardener Volunteer Training course, to help revise Seed to Supper and to administer Seed to Supper and to cultivate connections we need with community partners and to help manage people and support people who are Seed to Supper course facilitators. We need somebody about half-time to do that. And I'm in desperate need of an administrative assistant. This isn't something that you can take care of in the counties, but this is sort of my longer term goal, is to make sure that we have the staff we need to run the program responsibly, because right now it's me and Leanne with our hair on fire. And I love this work. This is not me complaining. I love this work. And if I could expand time and space to be everywhere all at once and visiting all of you and listening to all of you and learning from all of you and seeing your great work and also answering my email and handling, applying for grants and submitting my receipts through the very bureaucratic infrastructure at OSU and doing all of the other things that we do, I would love to do that. But there's only one of me. I turned 50 this year, so I'm feeling it in my body and my brain. And I can only work so many hours in a week. Yeah, so that's why I bring this up. On the horizon, so these are some things that I just want to let you know that I see us as working on in the next 1 to 3 years. There's more than this, but these are sort of the main priorities of mine. Revising the Seed to Supper program. As I mentioned, I have an undergraduate research assistant who, for his senior project, is launching a project to interview Seed to Supper facilitators. We submitted our human subjects review, or our research proposal to the Human Subjects Board at Oregon State in this last week. So hopefully we will get a quick thumbs up from them and we can dive right into that research. And if you've taught Seed to Supper, we will be reaching out to you to ask if you'd like to be interviewed for that. Um, our Garden Future initiative, I believe, will only grow in importance and value, and in terms of the uptake in counties. And you'll hear more about that. There's also you know, there's a module coming, or it's really a mini course coming for Master Gardener volunteers to take to catch you up on what's going on with climate change in Oregon and how we don't have to despair. There are steps we can take to help our communities be more resilient and prepared. And then, of course, the training course and textbook need to be revised. That is a major, major undertaking. And I'm going to need a lot of help with that because, I can't write a horticulture textbook on my own because I'm not a horticulturist and I don't have time. So I will be coordinating that with Leanne and hopefully someone else, and finding the experts and getting that written in a way that's engaging and revising the course so that it's not just, for those of you who took it online, it's a lot of voice over PowerPoint, which is not a best practice in adult learning. So we'd like to make that more interactive, have more ways for you to absorb that information in the ways that you prefer. A really exciting thing is that 2026 is the 50th anniversary of the Oregon Master Gardener Volunteer Program, and I would love to interview many of you um, at various events. Some short interviews, but also for those of you who've been around for 20, 30, 40. We even have a volunteer that I know of who's been around with us the entire time since 1976, to do oral history interviews. Again, I was a history professor before I came here. I'm excited to let you know that the Oregon State University Valley Library Special Collections has agreed to establish a Master Gardener Volunteer Program collection there of our papers, as well as, I'm assuming, any oral history interviews, audio, video, that we can submit to them. And then more growing and belonging programming. You know, growing and belonging is the item that I get the most pushback on from volunteers because they say, what does this have to do with gardening? And I hear it the least from people in Washington County and the Portland metro area. Let's be honest. Because you all understand better than a lot of people in Oregon what it's like to live in an area that is highly socioeconomically diverse, that has people speaking a lot of different languages, that have people coming from all over the world who have different lived experiences. And we need to serve all those people and we need to learn from each other. And that's really what the growing and belonging programming is about. How can we make everybody feel more welcome in the program, either as volunteers or as participants in our program? And then, as I mentioned earlier, when I was talking about challenges, I'd like to get some non-horticultural professional development opportunities going for faculty and staff. Some of that's growing and belonging. Some of it is just, some of them have people that they're managing and they've never had any kind of supervisor training. Some of them never have had any training in managing volunteers. Neither have I. Um, some of them, they say to me, I think I might have said this earlier, I can't remember, but I'm a scientist, not a conflict manager, and I'm not highly trained in interpersonal conflict. And so, getting them some crucial conversations, for example, training would be great. And then this Garden Engager program, and Engager is an acronym for something that I don't remember at this moment. But I've envisioned a program that runs parallel to the Master Gardener Volunteer Program that has a lower volunteer commitment and that is targeted at people who are still working age, who are still in the workforce, because these are the people in terms of age. It's another one of those protected categories that I haven't talked about that we need to work on with demographic parity. Um, and targeting really our nonprofit and community partners and their staff and training them in topics like food insecurity, food deserts, and food swamps. A food desert is a place without grocery stores. A food swamp is a place that might have a convenience store. It only has junk food, um, no fresh food. And then also climate resilience, food sovereignty, and garden wellness, which is sort of a name for horticultural therapy when you aren't certified in horticultural therapy, right? We all know the physical and mental benefits of gardens. Um, and then training them to go out into their communities, targeting community organizers, as I said, nonprofit staff, and anyone else who just wants to get involved in their communities and help them build more resilient and healthy communities in a way that maybe has a less intensive volunteer commitment than the Master Gardener program. It is, yeah, that's what I'll say about that. So it's your turn. And so I would love to know what you think is most valuable about the Washington County Master Gardener Volunteer Program, both for you as a volunteer and for the communities you serve. And in this case, each one of these we might do differently. I'm thinking through these as we do this. I'd like to hear in the chat, take a moment to, in the chat, open up the chat and please type in um, uh, what you what is most valuable to you. Now, if you have questions for me, we'll leave a little time for questions, and you can put those in the Q&A. Now, there's two different boxes, right? But in the chat, go ahead and type in um, your sorry, what you find most valuable. I'm assuming you can see the chat. If you don't see the chat, you can also put them in the Q&A. And Linda Myers has raised her hand. Hold on one moment, please. Oh, it says chat is disabled. Okay, hold on. I am seeing here. So funny, it's showing for me that chat is working. So it says chat is disabled for you guys. So you can, let's see, panelists, attendees can chat with, oh, there. Let's see if that worked. I've never hosted a Zoom webinar before, so I'm learning this as we go. Are you able to see the chat now? Let's see.
I can see it.
Great, great. So go ahead and type in there what you think is most valuable about the Washington County Master Gardener Volunteer Program for you as a volunteer and for the communities you serve. Wait a minute, let people type. Continual learning and the ability to help community members. You share objective information on horticulture. Yes. Now with TikTok and social media and YouTube and everyone having a blog, most people can't tell. They don't have the training you have, right? On what is evidence-based, right? Rhonda Frick-Wright says that the most valuable thing to me is the study group that meets twice monthly to discuss and share questions, as well as having a presentation on a different topic each month. That is phenomenal. Lisa Barnhart says that teaching sustainable gardening is most valuable because it protects pollinators and discourages harmful pesticides. These are great. These are terrific. People talked about, Shirley Walcott talks about how she did seed to supper when she was a new Master Gardener volunteer. Other people like the study group. I'm not going to read all of these. I'm hoping that you are all able to see these things in the chat here. Lifelong learning is a theme. Yeah, people are so grateful just to have a place to get things answered, to interact with people at the farmers markets. Fabulous, fabulous. So, okay. Then, sorry, I mean to. Okay, just reading all of your great comments here. As a member of the Speakers Guild, Harriet writes this. She welcomes the opportunity to meet members of the community, find out what their questions are, and to help them find answers. Yeah, that's the way we connect with people, right? By talking with them directly and figuring out what their questions are, what their needs are. Excellent. Well, you can continue to put what you find valuable in there, but I'm also curious what you think about my wish list, right? And I have it up on the screen there, but Seed to Supper is on my wish list. More Seed to Supper classes that serve the population that is most in need of it. Working toward demographic parity the Garden Future Initiative, and more statewide staff so we can build capacity to better support the volunteers. What can we be doing to make those things a reality? So, and then also feel free to share at the same time what's on your wish list and why for your program or for the statewide. Oh, I love what you said, Terry, that having being able to connect with other people interested in gardening is a real joy. It is. It is. Stephanie, I'm glad you're interested in Seed to Supper. Cynthia, yeah, wildfire safety. I hope that nobody here had friends or family in California who have lost things, homes and loved ones. I'd really love to hear what's on your wish list. And then if you have questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A. And I'd also love to just have a discussion too. But yeah, do tell me what's on your wish list, because if you don't tell me what you want, then I can't make it happen. Yeah, Linda, that is a challenge that we have lost some great candidates. Retaining volunteers is high on my list, right? How do we make that easier? In Benton County, Ottilia Schroeder, who is the um, coordinator down there, the staff member down there, she's 25 years old, and just a wonder. She has started this year. She is doing a few weeks of the course, and then there's a break whenever there are local events where volunteers can volunteer and start to get their hours, and then goes back into the course. And then there's another volunteering break. And she does that. She kind of draws out the course and gives people chances to just build that in, and then really is looking for opportunities for them to stay involved. It's good to see some familiar names in here. Hello to everybody. Yes, people sharing the power of the demonstration garden and farmers markets. Please help you work on demographic parity. I will wave my magic wand. Yeah, so that's a really good point, Michael. Yeah, so you tend to center around your work around Beaverton, he says, but the largest area of poverty and the most sort of diverse areas are probably more toward Forest Grove and Hillsborough. So it says perhaps we need to place another one of our education gardens more in the center of one of our urban areas. That's great. That's a great idea. Yeah, if you map where your demonstration gardens are and your education gardens or learning gardens, are they places where people can access them? If they aren't in somebody's neighborhood, are they a short hop on public transit, for example? We like our Seed to Supper classes to be on a public transit line. An easier reporting system, so you're concentrating on our mission instead of counting hours. Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, we have to track our impact. We need the numbers to argue for our impact and continued funding. But I completely understand that, Harriet, and I'm hoping that as technology gets better, that it becomes less complex, and I can talk with our developer of VRS to see what we can do to streamline that. Let me make a note of that, because one thing I haven't done that with him is user experience testing of the VRS system, where we basically he would sit down, you and he and I would sit down and share a screen, and you would show us how you use VRS, and new volunteers would we could watch them stumble around VRS and figure out how we can make everything easier. Linda Myers is letting us know that at public events you get many questions on fire safety. Yeah. Yeah, Jack, I know that you guys have been doing great work around growing and belonging, and you have that growing and belonging committee. I wish that's something that um, more counties had, and it's something that that's the other thing I should have put on that list. We are planning to relaunch our growing and belonging statewide community as sort of as a learning community. I'd love to have an advisory board as well. I do not see any questions in the Q&A. Feel free to ask anything there. Yeah, it says you can't see any questions in, Rhonda says you can't see any questions in Q&A, so please repeat the question. There are no questions in Q&A. Do I feel confident in my continued funding? Barbara asked. Yes. I feel confident in the continued funding for the statewide program to fund me and Leanne, at least for the next couple of years. The counties, of course, that varies, right? OSU is committed to putting money into counties where um, counties are putting in, are putting some skin in the game, right? That's why OSU withdrew from Josephine County because their commissioners defunded the extension office and weren't providing any funding for it. So as long as the counties, and I know that's complicated in Multnomah, as long as there's some source of funding in the counties for offices and office staff, then OSU often is the one funding the faculty. And then yeah, farmers markets are where they are. Are you going to the farmers markets in all the neighborhoods, right? Like, are you going to the farmers markets out in Forest Grove? I was just talking with Trujana about that this morning, and she's like, well, you know, they wanted us to pay for a booth. So it's like, well, how can you find funding for a booth? And is that something the association can pay? Are there other sponsors that can pay for that? If volunteers don't live near there, are there volunteers who are interested in engaging with a new population to them and making that drive? Julie would like a centralized way to hear about volunteer opportunities and learning opportunities in all three counties. I don't know if Srijan is on here, but I'm sure I will let her know about that. I'm also saving the chat as we go so that I can see that. So Bruce Bartlett says in the Q&A, it's a huge challenge to build connections to diverse demographic communities. How can OSU help? Um, and yeah, the one thing that we can do is sit with you and help you brainstorm I know because I've seen the list that you all have, that your extension office and your volunteers have over the last few years worked with a lot of different organizations that serve all different kinds of communities. Sometimes it's a one-off event, a fair of some kind, or a conference that you've tabled at or something. And other times it's a longer standing collaboration. And so that's where to start with those. But we also can, within the extension office, there's usually lots of programs there. We've got usually 4-H, SNAP Ed, sometimes small farms, though I don't know how relevant that is in the Portland metro area, though in the more outlying rural areas of the counties, yes, that would be, the case. But figuring out what connections those people have, it really is about networking your way toward people who already have a relationship with folks, the folks you want to serve. Yeah. And then Stephanie Engel says, some counties have service districts for extension. Washington County does not. Is this something we can investigate? That is a question above my pay grade. That is a question for Srijana, who is, kind of on my level, but in the Portland metro area, and she's going to understand that better. Or if she doesn't, I can connect her with the right people. Because the funding is so different in every county. It's something I've not yet wrapped my mind around. So I'm sorry I don't have a great answer to that. Oh, Barbara, that's very, very so kind of you. I think you were talking to me. You are fabulously full of focus, info, and exuberance for this hour. For this hour. I'm just kidding. Yeah. I love this job. I love working with all the volunteers. Yeah, and Marilyn, you and I have talked about this, I think, there's so much to do, and it's so hard to know what should take precedent, um, given the limited resources. Um, yeah. I gave a talk on Sunday to Douglas County, and I was in such a good mood that at the end of it, people are like, have you done stand-up? And then I got the nasty grams from somebody because, I mentioned that we should serve all people, and I mentioned DEIA, and that we should serve people with disabilities. And I got the nasty gram as usual, from a guest, not from a Master Gardener volunteer, saying that, that's too political. But I try to keep it light while still doing the work. Other questions? We have a few minutes left. Oh, sorry, I didn't scroll down. Linda says, I appreciate your openness to communicate and have a frank discussion. Standing up for DEIA is such a hot potato right now. I'm sorry, Linda, if you meant for that to be anonymous. Everybody, Linda's a social justice warrior. Um, I appreciate that too. It's something that's very close to my heart. And I grew up in I grew up in Long Beach, California. And when I was growing up in Long Beach, it was very segregated. So I lived in a very white neighborhood. My family's lived on the same block in Long Beach for 100 years. And for more than 100 years now. And I can't afford to live there. Uh, it's a lovely place to live. Uh, but I was bused because of, demographic parity, right? And needing equity. I was bused to a gifted program that was designed to draw white and East Asian students to what we called the inner city. I literally went to Snoop Dogg's high school. He graduated a few years before I did. And I was there at the height of the gang wars and during the LA riots. And the school was 20% white, 20% Black, 20% Pacific Islander, 20% Asian, and 20% Latina. And it was fabulous. It was an amazing school. It was under-resourced in many ways, but it was really, really terrific. I also wrote the obituary page for my high school yearbook. And then I went back when I was a community college student in Long Beach, and I tutored there. And I saw the rat bites on the students, and I saw that I was in a program where we each had a brand new copy of the textbook to take home every day. And other classes of the poorer students and the students who were not white had tattered books this was in 1993, 94. They had books from the 70s that had like cheap watercolor illustrations in them and were tattered, and they didn't even have a class set. They were sharing them. And so it's just deep in my bones that I want to see us serve everybody, because I've seen what happens to people when they don't get the resources they need. Not to bring us down, but that's where I'm coming from. No other questions? I'm shocked. I'm shocked. And I just want to issue a blanket apology if you have been in my email inbox anytime in the last year. I get a lot of email. And people are like, why aren't you answering your email? And the answer is I am, it's just not yours yet. So I will get to everybody eventually. If we were not recording this, I would give you my cell number, because I work from home some of the time, and that's really the best way to reach me. So you can always email me and say, let's talk in your subject line, and I'll get to you. All right. Well, I really appreciate all of you sharing all of your wish list and whatnot. Oh shoot, I'm going to share this again real quick, because my last slide has my contact info on it. So I'll put that up here, right here. And I know it's ugly, but there you go. So it's leslie.madsen@oregonstate.edu. You too can send your email into the void. And yeah, Jack, I agree with you. The master naturalists, who are now called the Oregon naturalists, and working with the food preservers and whatnot. Yes, absolutely. We should be partnering more with those people, especially the food preservers around Seed to Supper. And with that, I will turn it over to Hope for your business meeting.
All right, Leslie, if you would turn off the recording at this point,
Sure.
since you're the man in charge.